So we are talking about these goals, these pastoral goals, and we've just talked about knowing God. I'm going to close with a quote by J.I. Packer from my favorite book of all time, Knowing God. Packer writes, "What makes life worthwhile is having a big enough objective, something which catches our imagination and lays hold of our allegiance. And this the Christian has in a way that no other person has. For what higher, more exalted, and more compelling goal can there be than to know God?" That's what we're doing in pastoral ministry. That's what we're doing in preaching. To have a congregation that wants to be known as people who know God. And it's what we want to do with people we're counseling who often lose sight of that. So that's our first goal, is helping people to know God. Second, pastoral counseling should inspire people to want to glorify God. Verse 10, "So as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to Him, bearing fruit in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God." The way Jesus would say it, John 15:8, "By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples." This is what people need. Jonathan Edwards said it this way: "As you have not made," this is one of my favorite Edwards quotes, "as you have not made yourself, so you were not made for yourself. You are neither the author nor the end of your own being. Nor is it you that uphold yourself in being, or that provide for yourself, or that are dependent on yourself. There is another that hath made you, and preserves you, and provides for you, and on whom you are dependent. And He hath made you for Himself, and for the good of your fellow creatures. And not only for yourself, He has placed before you higher and nobler ends than self, even the welfare of your fellow men, and of society, and the interests of His kingdom. And for these you ought to labor and live, not only in time, but for eternity." What Edwards is doing is he's casting a vision for how we're meant to live our lives. If Christ makes a difference in our lives, it should not simply be what we think about ourselves, or how we feel about ourselves, or our confidence in God. It should affect the way we live. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm emphasizing it because this is what people lose sight of. Why am I here? How should I live my life? Again, they have the flesh, the devil, and the world telling them how to do it, and contrary to God. We need to help them know how to live their lives in God-glorifying ways. It's important because when people come to you, they're going to want solutions. How do I fix this? I've got this problem. This thing is happening to me. I'm not able to get this that I need. Help me figure out the solution to my life. People want their lives fixed. And as I say over and over again, people are not fixable. They are changeable. They are not fixable. Their lives can't be fixed. If you are able to solve a problem, there will be other problems. Life in this world is a trial. My friend Tim, he did not ask for this. He did not ask to be facing death. And at the very best, months of really difficult treatment, and having to step away from his church and leave them vulnerable as he is being treated for cancer. That's what we get. We get people who want solutions to their problems. They want remedies. They want you to give them something to do. They want you to tell them how to fix what they're in, or for you to fix it themselves. Someone comes in with a marriage problem. They're not coming in to talk about their problem. They're coming in to get you to fix the other person. If two of them coming in, they're coming in for you to fix the other person. That's what they want. The typical marriage problem, the idea of, if you have a couple that comes and says, we're having struggles in our marriage, but we are both desiring to know how to glorify God in this, there really isn't a marriage problem. They'll make it. They'll do fine. But when people start to think my problems need to be fixed without regard to how I respond, you have problems. We offer something entirely different. We do not offer fixes. One of the things I do most often in training pastors and even training pastoral teams in counseling is the tendencies for pastors to feel like, okay, if this situation happens, what do I tell them to do? We'll see later in today that the do in counseling is way down the line. How do I glorify God is the question that people need to feel like. And how do they do that? The basic question is, what does it mean to obey the Lord? In whatever situation I'm in, what does it mean to obey the Lord? Not obey the pastor, not obey rules. What does it mean to hear and obey the Lord? That's how you glorify God. We counsel gospel obedience. Right? We counsel the fact that you have been called, I think even in the conversation over there, not only helping people see how good God is for them, but how to live out of it, how to act out of it. How do we help people act on what they know to be true? You will find in our culture, maybe not yet in this culture, but people who I would call are over-counseled. They have a problem, they quickly go to somebody. It may be family, it may be a friend, it may be a pastor, it may be a professional, but they go and they seek help. But you can tell the person who's on a hunt for explanations or solutions to problems. Tell me what to fix. Tell me how to do this. Tell me what to do. That problem has gotten the wrong view of counseling. If a counselor if you obey a counselor based on what they say to do, then that's a foolish person, because that person is not responsible for your actions and the implications of what you do. So a question for you is your counseling tendency to be what we call pragmatic? In other words, is your counseling tendency to hear a problem and think about what the solution should be? You should do this. You should do this. You should do this. If that is your tendency, you have to resist that, because there's no opportunity for that person to hear from the Lord and obey and therefore please Him. People will please you. If you give them things to do, they will please you. They will do what you say. Even in good churches the way we're building, one of the things I recognize is someone coming to me, they'll do what I say partly because they've run out of other things to do. And they're looking, and I feel the responsibility, if I just give them what to do, they're going to say the pastor told me to do it, and therefore it should work out. And they've missed the whole point. God puts us into situations so that we might glorify Him. God puts someone in a job that they don't like so that they can learn how to glorify Him. Now maybe, let's use a job as an illustration. You have someone who is in a job, and maybe they're being mistreated by their by their employer. Maybe they're not being paid the way they should. Maybe they're being promised things and they're not delivering. And so they come to you and say, what do I do? You could say, well, you need to quit that job. You know, that's not going to be good. You can do better than that. And they quit their job, and now they come to you and say, I don't have a job. What should I do? They will let you manage their lives. But if the question is, okay, what do you think the Lord would have you do? That's the question they need to wrestle with. What would the Lord have you do? What would it call to glorify God? Well, it might be they say, well, you know, I feel like for now I've got to support my family and this is the best I can do, and I don't think it's wise for me to risk leaving the job or losing the job, so I need to just know how to do better with it. Well then, okay, great. But you can also say, and if a better job comes along, God might provide and you might be able to find that better job, but you're in a situation and you need to know how to glorify God in that situation. If we don't teach our people to do that from our preaching, and we don't teach our people to do that in our counsel, we're going to have people who view God's goodness based on how well things are going in their lives. And they'll have no category for how I can glorify God when things aren't going my way. So that's an important thing. We need to help people glorify God. And then third, pastoral counseling should encourage someone to trust God. And there in verse 11, may you be strengthened with all power according to His glorious might, for all endurance and patience, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of His beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. That's one of the greatest gospel proclamations in the New Testament. And so, but he's leading to that from a place of trial and suffering. You are in a situation, and this is your ultimate answer. So he starts with, may you be strengthened with all power according to His glorious might. In a sense, what he's doing is he's using what we call redundancy. He's saying the same thing multiple times. He's basically saying, may you be strengthened with power according to power. It's a redundant grace. It's an overflowing grace. May you have strength coming out of strength. For what reason? For endurance and patience. In the New Testament, when you find those words together, it's communicating something. Endurance is typically a word the word endurance is typically a word used in relationship to circumstances. Difficult circumstances we endure. Patience is a word typically used for difficult people that we have to deal with. So what is Paul saying? You need strength from God to deal with both difficult circumstances and difficult people in your life. In such a way that you can actually give thanks to the Father. Why? Because the gospel has come into your life. Because the gospel has come into your life, whatever you face, you can endure it if it's a trial of circumstance, and you can deal with it in a godly way if it's a trial of people. It covers everything. Jesus said in John 16:33, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But take heart, I have overcome the world. That's essentially what Paul is describing here. The overcoming of Christ allows us to live in a sinful, fallen, difficult world with sinful, fallen, difficult people and have peace and have nothing define us but Jesus Christ. That's what God is calling us to do. Martin Lloyd-Jones said it like this: the secret of a happy Christian life is to realize that it is all of grace and to rejoice in that fact. It is grace at the beginning, grace at the end. So that when you and I come to lie upon our deathbeds, the one thing that should comfort and help and strengthen us there is the thing that helped us at the beginning. Not what we have been, not what we have done, but the grace of God in Jesus Christ our Lord. The Christian life starts with grace. It must continue with grace. It ends with grace. Grace, wondrous grace. By the grace of God, I am what I am. Not I, but the grace of God which was with me. We want people to trust the grace of God, to rely upon the grace of God. One of my responsibilities in our church is to pastor the elderly people, which I didn't really want to do because I don't consider myself old. I choose to be in denial about my age. In our culture, it doesn't give you any stature to be old. It's interesting, in America, the stature is among the young. The young is where things are happening. The older you get, the less relevant you are. And so to be old means not only do we not care what you say, because you're old, what you say no longer matters. It's built on faulty old information. And so we have people in our church, godly men and women, who feel left out by their families. They feel left out by the world. They have no life, no purpose in the world because the world has said, we idolize youth and you are no longer young. And they are facing trials. Facing trials. I'm dealing with a couple, one of my small group leaders, where they have a daughter who's a drug addict, and she has 5 children, and they're both in their 70s, try to care for 5 children. As the daughter comes in and out of the situation in chaos, and they have poor health. I'm dealing with people who are facing the end of life. I'm dealing with people who are discovering they have dementia, where they're starting to lose their ability to think. This is where I have to take them. They're not going to get better. These people are not going to get better. Aging means you're not going to get better. And if they don't know how to endure and how to persevere, they're not going to finish well. You're going to deal with people who are, at 25 years old, need to start learning how to finish well. We don't wait till we're 50 to think about finishing well. The wise believer starts thinking about, how do I finish my course well at the beginning? Because it's grace at the beginning, grace throughout, and grace at the end. Why is it important? Because people are looking for relief from their suffering. They just want it to stop. I want a pill to fix it. I want a doctor to solve it. I want a therapist to make it go away. I want you to provide what I can't. I was dealing this past week with someone who has made foolish financial decisions, and now they're in a problem, and they're coming to the church, and they're saying, I have financial problems, can you help me? We have learned over the time, and I'm sure you have as well, that just because someone comes, even if they're a person in the church, and just giving them money isn't going to solve the problem if they're poorly managing what they have. And so we have to help them, and sometimes that's, here's what we can do, but here's what we can't do, and they have to endure the bad fruit of experiences. People don't want that. They want relief from their suffering. We offer hope to persevere in trial through the promises of the gospel. We bring to them and say, Jesus is with you. He has not abandoned you. He will not abandon you in this trial. Follow Him. Which means we walk with people through difficult circumstances. And we'll talk about this more in our class. If you're a pastor, sometimes you watch over a considerable length of time the fiery trials of people's lives that you cannot change. and it's hard to do. Sometimes you watch over time the effects of disobedience in someone's life over time, and the way it robs them of joy, and the way it robs them of peace, and the way it robs them of assurance at times. And you will see that, and you'll feel somewhat, I want to stop. If they would just listen to me, I could make it go away. I could get them, we could get relief for this. But they don't listen to you. But you cannot reject. And so you walk alongside people in suffering. Sometimes it's suffering that's come upon them. Sometimes it's suffering that's self-inflicted. But in either case, it's suffering, and they need to know the grace of God. So that's why we need to help people. We need to counsel gospel hope. God is with you. He is not here necessarily. We don't know if He's going to heal you. We don't know if He's going to bring your child back to Jesus. We don't know if He's going to save your spouse. But we know you can endure. And we know you can persevere. And we know you can be patient. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about medication. Medication is huge in the States. I tell people, if you're in college and you're not on some kind of a psychological medication, then you aren't respected. The only way you're respected is if you identify that you have a problem that needs medication. That gives you a sense of value in your culture. Because our culture values brokenness. Our youth culture, whoever's the most broken, the most traumatized, has the most value in our culture. Whoever's the greatest victim has the most value. Not value in terms of what we think of value in terms of the image of God, and value in terms of you are the most authentic person if you are the most traumatized person. You are the one that we need to tell us how to live life. That's what our culture's doing right now. So medication is a badge of honor in the generation in their 20s and early 30s. If you're not on medication, then you're not a person who really is dealing with their real life. So, and it's happening in the church too. So one of the things we deal with our young people is everything has got to be a psychological problem, and everything is trauma, and I'm a victim in everything, and I need some kind of professional help, and I'm going to need medication. In the short, and we'll talk about it more later on, I think the answer is not to say medication isn't helpful, because it can be. I think the way to say it is that they don't know why medication works. When you have a drug that's used in psychology, used in psychiatry, it almost never was developed to be used for the problem it's trying to solve. It was developed some other way, and they realized a secondary benefit also makes people feel this way about this. They don't know how the brain works enough to be able to target medication to guarantee the fix of the brain, because the brain is the most complicated organ in our body, right? Our brains are complicated. And our brains both move us certain ways, and they also are changeable based on the way we understand things and the way we process things. It's a two-way, it's not like our heart. A brain changes based on its input and also changes us. And so because of that, they don't know they know certain basic things, but that's why, for example, a depression medication works about 50% of the time, most medications. In fact, do you guys know the word placebo? Okay. So studies have proved when it comes to depression, and we'll talk about depression, which is one of the most complicated things to deal with. Medication is no more helpful than placebo, statistically. You do a study sample of people, and you give half of them a depression medication, and this doesn't matter what the medication has been, and you give half of them placebo. They will find that half the people on the depression medication who know they're on depression medication or who told they're on depression medication see an improvement, and half the people don't. And half the people who are given a placebo but told it's depression medication, half of those people say it worked, and half of them don't. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't take it. I'm not saying that. And as counselors, we're not physicians. We don't tell people what they should do with medication. In our country, that's malpractice. What I'm saying is that when it comes to medication, the way my professor, Ed Welch, talked about it was medication. I actually have a whole outline on mental illness, which I'm probably not going to do because it's very much built around the American model. But medication at its very best, no matter what the condition, it takes somebody who may have extremes, like say depression. They have an extreme low, and they can't deal with life, and they retreat. Medication can raise their level of ability to function enough to begin to deal with the real reasons that they're depressed. But it will never cure depression. Nobody in the psychology world thinks medication cures depression. Nobody does. People who you talk to will think it does, but nobody does because they know the studies. They know the statistics. It's not guaranteed to do anything. In fact, you know what the most important thing someone can do for depression? I'll give you a little bit of it. The most important thing, the thing that works absolute best, any study shows absolute best. What would you think it would be? Music? No, that can be a big one. Exercise. Exercise is the most effective treatment for depression, statistically. Because exercise starts, again, we're not talking about Christianity, we're talking about culture. Exercise changes, it gets certain chemicals working in our bodies in different ways that begins to change mood. It relieves stress. It gets us out of a position of being stuck into something productive. All those things are what are needed for someone to come out of depression. You will never talk somebody out of depression. Depression lifts because other things happen. We'll talk more about depression, but yeah, we're going to cover that specifically and in a certain level of detail because that's an important thing to nail down. You're not going to hear me be anti-psychology. I'm not going to be anti-psychology. But psychology comes from the world. I'm not going to be anti-economics. But I'm not going to say the world's approach to economics deals with the Christian view of the kingdom of God. Right? Because it comes from the world, you can't bring it into the kingdom and make it work. But it doesn't mean there isn't a certain level of value that's there or insight that's there. So we'll talk about that. There are a lot of mistakes made in that area. That's a great question. I'm going to speak to that a little bit and cover it more later too. I think on the issue of counseling women as men, you have to be very, very careful. Doesn't matter whether you're married or single. In fact, sometimes married men are more vulnerable because they can have a frustration with their marriage, and they feel like the person they're counseling thinks they're great, and they can actually get caught up in emotional connection because to that person they're counseling, they're the answer, and it just makes it very easy to feel. For my pride to be stoked in that if I'm married. So it doesn't matter if you're single or married, you have to be careful. what I tell guys is if we are pastors of the whole church. And the women in the church need to know we are their pastors. Part of that is by the way we relate to them, we demonstrate how a godly man respects a woman and her vulnerability. And so one of the principles is I want by my interaction with you to show you how a man should respect that you are vulnerable to men. I'm going to be very careful because not only do I need to be careful for me, but I want to help you understand, well, if this guy's coming up and he's coming up and he's saying, let me talk to you, I will help you, I'll help you. And you've been the man, married or single, who has said, you know what, I don't think we should meet unless there's somebody else here. I want you to feel safe. We've trained that woman how to discern the ungodly man. But we also have to do it because we have to protect reputation and we have to make sure we're above reproach. So we have to have, whether we're single or married, we have to have a way to relate that's consistent with all women. That it isn't based on, well, whether you're attractive or not determines whether how I relate to you. One of the principles I have is I will meet with a woman, and this is important because in Sovereign Grace, different pastoral teams have different approaches. There isn't a one way. We recognize that our ladies can't feel pastored if all they ever hear is, well, ladies, if you have a problem, talk to another woman. When it's nothing about sex at all. I've got financial problems. I have to talk to another woman. I can't talk to a pastor. No, I will help you. Now, I'm going to have a way of helping you that doesn't depend on meetings. See, that's the idea that everything is handled through counseling is not a biblical idea. So, for you as a single man, let's say you're pastoring a church as a single man, you can develop a way to pastor the women in your church, even in such a way, and this is where I'd want to defer to Michael and to Josh and how they want to build and plant. So I'm just giving you my perspective. You can do it in such a way as that a woman would feel comfortable coming to you and saying, I'm struggling with this. And they would know you would use discernment and wisdom to know how far you should go into counseling them. And then you would have your own methodology. Okay, I've got a woman over here. I have women in the church that I've trained and I interact with, so I'll send a woman. So I never meet with a woman on an issue more than once or twice before I get somebody else involved. Once I get somebody else involved, it doesn't mean I'm saying I'll no longer talk to you. But rather than meet with you regularly, I might meet with you in 2 months. Let's talk and see how you're doing. I want them to still feel my care. And but I want to make sure I don't create a vulnerable situation for either of us. I'll give you guys, I don't know if I was going to cover this later on. I'll give you guys an actual experience from my life. I had close friends. The gentleman was an artist, and I was friends with him, friends with his wife. His wife was also an actor, and we had a drama ministry for a while, and I led the drama ministry, and so I wrote and I wrote things, and she did those things. So we had a working relationship, but it was friendship, and it was friendship with them as a couple, and we both had friendships. Well, he got cancer, and so I was their pastor during the cancer. And so what happened was, and this is probably something I wouldn't want on the video. Ultimately, this is just for you guys. As he got sicker and sicker, I would go over and visit with him and visit with them and talk with them. And I would visit them in the hospital. I would take them to the hospital. He was Jewish by heritage, And so he had about 6 or 7 of his friends, and he said, I really need support. And so what I would like to do is anybody who'd be willing to, would you be willing to get a tattoo with the Hebrew word for warrior to show that you stand with me? And so I have a tattoo that's not big, but it's right there. That's the Hebrew letters for warrior. Because of him, I'm not a tattoo guy. I wouldn't get one otherwise. But I got one because I wanted him to there. So as he got sicker and sicker, I would spend time over there. And there was one night where he said, listen, I just want to watch a movie with you. Can you just, because he just was tired of being ministered to. He just wanted to have a friend. So he came over. So I came over, and his wife was out with a friend. We were watching the movie. This was probably 2 months before he died. And he started getting sick. And so he was starting to not feel well. His wife came home from being out, and so she was sitting with us. And then he went upstairs and never came back. And so it's now me and the wife. Now, as friends, we would have sat around and talked. I knew his whole family. I knew his children. They knew my children. But I started to realize, okay, I'm farther into this situation than maybe I'm going to need to be. And so when, at the very end, when literally he was up dying in the bed, I would come over, and I started to realize it's just me and her because he isn't conscious. Nobody was doing anything wrong, but the situation had made us cross lines that nobody was wrong in crossing. But with him not there, everything changed. And when he died, I was her pastor and I was her friend, and she leaned on me, and I realized, and she realized, we have to change. Because I've just walked through the most vulnerable experience of her life. And I have gotten past all of the gates most men should get through. And I am now closer to her than any other man in her life with her husband gone. And I realized, and we had to have a conversation. And I had to say, we are still friends. I'm still your pastor. But we have to do something different. And it was a very hard conversation. Because to her it felt like, why? I'm not, she wasn't my age. But that's what you have to be careful with as a pastor, is not, I'm lusting after a woman and I'm going to try to counsel her. It's, I care, and in my caring, I have gotten beyond where I should get. And I need wisdom to know how to reestablish those boundaries. That's more, when I talk to most guys in this kind of context, I'm not worried about them using counseling to manipulate a woman. I'm concerned that they'll find themselves in a position they never thought they would get into because they haven't. And in this situation, I had all my pastors knew. I was accountable. Everything was in place. The situation. But it taught me, I've got to make sure I don't find myself in a place where there are no boundaries between us. And so sometimes you have to do that. Well, in that situation, it wasn't marriage counseling. I was doing crisis counseling. I have to go over there right now. I have to deal with, he's just gotten another this. I've got to go to the hospital. It wasn't going to work. It was counseling a crisis, not a marriage, right? It makes more sense if it's a marriage problem and my wife's involved. But this is a crisis of a couple because there's a death involved. Now there's only one person. You were counseling two people. You're caring for two people. Now there's only one. And that's where a lot of these things happen, because what's going on with the woman is now she's vulnerable. She doesn't have, for women, it's not about physical attraction. It's about safety and security and someone who is caring and is sensitive and knows how to care. And that's where we're vulnerable as pastors. Women who gravitate toward a pastor, it's usually not because of physical attraction. It's because the pastor embodies something that gives them security. Maybe something they never had before. Which is why single women, you have to be a little careful. Because they may have had bad experiences and you're the good experience. But they haven't been prepared for how to respond to a good experience. So what we had to do is I had to say, okay, we're going to continue to relate. And because she was a parent, she couldn't just drop everything and come and meet. So we established that she would always have a friend at the house when I came. There would always be a friend in the other room. And we just made it clear, or she would come to my office when she could. We did it. And when I counsel women, I never counsel women if there's not somebody else in the office there at the time. I do it with my door open. I do it. One of the things I do is I have an office. One of the things you always do is you never put yourself between a woman and the door. If you're in a room with a woman, never put yourself where she has to go past you to get out. Always put yourself in a place where she could get up at any point and leave on her own. That's positioning. Always put yourself in a position where you can be seen from the outside. Always put yourself in a position where somebody else could overhear if they're close by. That protects you and protects her. Some women will tell me, can you close your door? And I say, I'm sorry, I can't. I want to talk about something I feel uncomfortable if somebody's out there. Well, I know we can talk about it in a way that's comfortable, but I can't close my door. So, is that helpful? Yeah, so I'm getting much more deep into that, but that's the difference between counseling and pastoring. We have that kind of place in someone's life where suddenly it becomes vulnerable. So you guys, I want to do something. Actually, we'll skip that now. Let's go to the next outline, the heart of biblical counseling. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because I want to get through all three today. So let me know if you have that. Got it? Okay, great. The other outline would have made good sense if you'd seen it. Paul Tripp. You guys know Paul Tripp? Yeah, Paul Tripp's become a friend over the years because he lives in Philadelphia, and so I'll see him occasionally. He's an artist. He does metal art. So he takes big pieces of metal and he welds them into art, like in his basement. And so he's a crazy dude. His wife runs an art gallery in Philadelphia, so I'll stop in there. But I was talking to him one time, and he said, I mentioned this before. He said, you will not find talking to solve problems in the Bible. Which was hard for me because it's what I do. That's what I get paid to do. It's what he got paid to do. And the point he was making is that the idea of therapy, the idea that I sit down with a professional or somebody who knows information or somebody who has training and I get their insight poured into me so I can become a better person is not a Bible view of life. It's not a Bible view of relationship. It's not a Bible view of discipleship. Discipleship is not sitting down with someone and just telling them how to live their lives. Discipleship is watching. Discipleship is engaging. Discipleship is shared life. Counseling is that way too. Ed Welch has told me that good counseling eventually starts to look like good fellowship because we're all sinners. what the psychological approach is, no matter how you do it, it's based on expertise. I've got expertise that you need, and that's what I'm giving you. Biblical counseling is not that way. Biblical counseling is people in need of grace talking to people in need of grace. And just as easy as one day I might counsel you, the next day you might counsel me. If the people in my church, if I feel like they can't help me, then I have a false sense of what it means to be a Christian. I need to know that the new believer can come into my life and bring an observation, and God can use that. Even if I've been a Christian for 37 years. There is a wisdom principle, and we'll talk about that a little bit too, and how wisdom comes into play. And wisdom is a function of life experience, but it's not a function of knowledge. It's a function of the knowledge of God applied in life. So, we have to get rid of the idea that what we're doing is counseling. I call it personal ministry. You can call it biblical counseling, that's fine. Those are two words that need to be explained, right? Biblical, what do you mean by biblical counseling? And what do you mean by counseling? I just call it personal ministry. I call it pastoring. I pastor people. I pastor people through conversation. Yeah, do you do counseling? I do personal ministry. I pastor people. Partly because I don't want to have to get people thinking I'm counseling in the way they understand counseling. I want to understand it on my terms. So, just to jump into this, the media world, the film and television world that I live in, is infested with superheroes. It's like whether Avengers, whatever it is. It's like every 3 days a new movie about a superhero. Somebody with some amazing strength that they're using comes out. People love superheroes. And so I started thinking to myself, what would it take to be a superhero counselor? Like, what would a superhero counselor do? And these are the things that came to mind. I think if you're going to be a superhero counselor, you would need, as a Christian, you would need a direct line of communication with God, with access to all knowledge and all wisdom that could be needed in a counseling situation. So no matter what anybody brings to you, you know how to deal with it. They can bring to you the craziest problem, and you know how to deal with it. It would be great if you had the superpower that you could actually see into the heart of the person and know their motivations. That you could know right into their motivations and why they do what they do with accuracy. It'd be great if you had an encyclopedic knowledge of everything that's ever happened to the person. So you know every hurt they've ever experienced, you know every pain they've ever had, you know every time they were treated wrongly, you know every mistake they made, you know it all. That would be great to have. In fact, you know how their brain chemistry works. You know where they're weak in their brain. If you want to be a super counselor, that you would have the gift of prayer, that you could pray and know God was going to move definitively in the way you pray over somebody. And that you would have the ability to be available to that person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, always ready for them. That seems to me to be a super counselor, right? That's what you're building. Well, that might be, or it might be, according to the Apostle Paul, it might be nothing. That's the point of 1 Corinthians 13. You can have all of that. When he starts 1 Corinthians 13, he lays out, this is all you can have But if you don't have love, you have nothing. You gain nothing. This is so crucial, gentlemen. The definitive aspect of what we do is love. You will never be able to help somebody if you don't love them. You must love, or you are worthless to God in counseling. It doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how experienced you are. And only to the extent that you love someone, as we'll describe, will you really help them. Whenever I find myself not struggling to love somebody, I recognize that I'm really disqualified from helping them until I deal with that issue. If I'm angry with somebody, I can't help them. If I'm in unbelief because somebody isn't changing, I can't help them. If I just don't like them because they irritate me, if I'm scared of them, I can't help them. If you don't have love, you have nothing. That's what he's saying. 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 8. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have and deliver up my body to be burned, and that's in reference really to other people, for the benefit of other people, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. So the question we need to answer is, why is it better why does Paul say it's better to love than to be a super counselor? And the answer is simply this. Because Jesus himself said, there is only one thing you need. And what is that? What's that? The guy asked, he came and asked, what is the one thing I need? And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor. This second command is like the first. In other words, it's attached to the first. It cannot be detached from the first. Love your neighbor as yourself. The reason this is important is because all biblical counseling flows in the relationship to loving God and loving others. We counsel in this point between loving God and loving others. We love God enough to where we want Him to use us for His glory, use our gifts, use our ministry, use our time for His glory. Lord, we want you to use everything about us for your glory because we love you. And we want to make sure we never stop loving you. And we want to love others in ways that help them to love you the same way. We counsel out of that idea. I'm always doing this in my mind. Am I loving God and loving others when I'm pastoring them? I get someone sends me an email or a text and says, can we get together? And I know what it's going to be about. And my first response, I will give you an example. Last Thursday, I was down in the D.C. area because I was going to fly out the next day, and so I stayed with my daughter in D.C. And we were out with their family because I don't get a chance to see them that much. And I'm preparing to come, right? I'm coming here, and I have to I got my COVID test, but I hadn't got my results yet, which means I'm wondering, am I going to come or not? So I'm down there, and it's like about 8 hours before I have to leave, and I don't have my test results. and I'm trying to figure out what does a person do when that happens. And so I'm there, and I'm struggling, and I don't know what to do, and I'm starting to get into anxiety. I'm experiencing anxiety. And then I get a text on my phone that says, from somebody in my church, says, we need to talk to you tonight. Our daughter is going to have a sex change operation. And you know what my response was? Are you serious? Tonight? Do you realize in my heart there was no love? There was no love there. They were interrupting me. They were in my way. I was telling God, God, why are you doing this? Why does this happen to happen today? Lord, you could have done this anytime. Lord, if I had gone on, tomorrow and they called, I could say, but now I have the time, but I'm not in the mood. I don't want to do this. I don't want to help them. I don't want to get involved in the conversation. I don't even know what to say. I can't fix this. I can't help her. She's not asking me for help. And I was struggling to love because I was preoccupied with my own needs. And so I had to have a conversation with the Lord, and I had to confess, Lord, because the one thing I couldn't do, I couldn't just pick up that phone and say, okay, how can I help you? What can I do? If I had not love. I couldn't call them and just try to get that conversation done. Have you ever done that? Have you ever had somebody wanting to talk to you and you really don't want to talk to them? But you realize if you don't talk to them, it's only going to get worse? And what do you do? Do you talk to them? So here it might be they disappear, right? They just, yeah. My biggest issue is that I'll see them on Sunday, and I know I avoided them. I'm like, I don't want to, That's the problem. Is that's why we're not counselors, because counselors don't have to worry about seeing people on Sunday. We do. And so sometimes we'll talk to them because we want to avoid having to see them on Sunday and deal with it on Sunday. And sometimes we won't talk with them because we're trying to avoid dealing with it now. And what I'm getting at is we have to recognize the sin in our hearts is always there. We're not always actively, intentionally sinning, but our own flesh is involved in that experience. And God is always testing that because He wants love. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to look at just this verses 4 through 8 fairly briefly, and we're just going to look how we're going to unpack these verses based on counseling principles. So let's look. First 1 Corinthians 4 through 8. The first phrase there is love is patient. It is long suffering. Think about that. What that means, what it can mean for counseling is that we don't have a timetable. If I meet with somebody and I have an expectation that they're going to change by me meeting with them and they don't change in time, am I impatient? If I meet with somebody and I ask them, hey, here's a good assignment for you. I need you to read this and come up with 4 things from this passage that you think God is trying to tell you. And we'll meet next week. And they come back in and they say, well, tell me how the assignment went. And they say, what assignment? That you were going to read this passage and you said you would do this. And they said, oh, I forgot. What comes up in your heart? That's where love gets tested. That's where patience gets tested. We don't know how long God is at work in somebody. One of the things that I've learned and this is what happens with a lot of pastors, is pastors think that when a problem comes to them, it's time to be fixed. Right? It's come to me, God must want it fixed. Where do we get that? No. That problem may have existed for years. And it may exist for years afterwards. It is arrogant for a pastor to say, because it's come to me, I now must fix it. That's impatient. That makes that person need to change because I'm not now involved. I'm the super counselor. You've had other people try to help you. They haven't helped you. That person didn't help you. That didn't help you. That didn't help you. Oh, you've got me. I'm going to change you. That's what pastors want to do. That's what they feel people want from them. No. We are actually coming alongside somebody in a process that God is in control of. And we don't know where we fit in the process. It could be that God is going to use this to bring everything else that He's been doing to fruit and you actually see change. It could be that you actually feel like you didn't help at all. You can tell how a pastor responds to a situation where someone isn't changing by their patience. Are they patient with people? Love is patient. Also, you're going to find in ministry that when you're ministering to somebody, eventually their sin is going to affect you. If they're a liar, they're going to lie to you. Paul Tripp says it this, I think you have this quote. In personal ministry, the sin of the person you are helping will eventually be revealed in your relationship. If you're ministering to an angry person, at some point that anger will be directed at you. If you're helping a person who struggles with trust, at some point she will distrust you. A manipulative person will seek to manipulate you. A depressed person will tell you he tried everything you've suggested and it didn't work. You can't stand next to a puddle without eventually being splashed by its mud. I've noticed this week that we get rain in the afternoon. And I imagine you're going to get more rain in the next few months. You're in a city. You can be fine, and then a car comes along and you're covered in the mud. That's what ministry is like. You just thought you were trying to help, and next thing you know, you're their problem. How do you respond with patience when that happens? Love is kind. Here's a good picture of this. Imagine you go to somebody and you want to share a problem. And they say, okay, let's talk about your problem. And they have you sit on the floor and they sit in the chair. And they say, tell me about your problem. In other words, they put you in a position where you're clearly inferior to them. Is that kind? No. But as pastors, we can function in our position and relate to somebody, I'm the pastor, and you're just a person in my church. And they can be more aware of my role than they can be of my brotherhood. And when I'm doing that, I'm not being kind. I'm forcing them into a system that works for me, not into what helps them. The other thing we can do is we can become what I call mini-Messiah. A mini-Messiah is that person who thinks, well, what you really need is me. You need my insight. You need to do what I tell you to do. I'm going to show you because I'm going to invest a lot of time in you. Have you ever done that? Have you ever invested a lot of time in one person? Right? There's an interesting thing that happens. And you'll see this. Every single church I've ever been at has one of these. And if you're in ministry, more than one. And if you're in ministry, you will experience this at least once. There are people who have long-term problems, maybe emotional problems, but they're struggling constantly. And so what they do is they come to a church and they're on a hunt for mercy. They want somebody who will be merciful to them, somebody who will extend mercy to them, somebody who will open up their lives, somebody who will tell them, I'm here for you. I know you felt rejected in the past. I'm not going to reject you. I know you say you don't have friends, but I'm going to be your friend, and I'm committed to you. And then what they start to realize is that person starts to attach to them. And that person, maybe this doesn't happen here, but it happens a lot in our culture. That person starts to attach to them, and then they realize there's nobody else involved. They've just identified me, and I become their functional Jesus. And I've made commitments. I've told them I'm going to be your friend no matter what. And I've told them I will be there for you whenever you need me. And I've told them, text me whenever you have a problem. And guess what? They do it. So, and so then you realize, okay, I can't do this forever. And so you start to try to involve them with other people. And they start to tell you, well, those people they're okay, but you're the one who really helps me. And you're the one who I feel like most understands my situation. And I really need you. And so then at some point, you say, well, I'm sorry I can't meet that need. I will do this, but I can't do that. And you draw a line. And that person treats that line like rejection. And then they disappear. Where do they go? No one knows. But then they find themselves at another fellowship. And they repeat the same thing. And it's a pattern. And often the person, if you've had that experience, the person you've had that experience with has had it repeatedly with other people. Because they were sucking the mercy out of a relationship and treating it like that's what they needed. As pastors, we can't do that. As brothers and sisters, we can't do that. That's not kind. We're actually teaching somebody to depend on people who you can't depend on. So you guys, have you experienced that at all? Is that familiar? Most guys who've done ministry have. Yeah, well, a good way to understand it is the person doesn't know they're doing it. It's a skill for survival. And so it's not dealing with their issues. They just, and who knows what the reason is, but one thing you can't do is judge them. It would be unkind to judge them. They don't know any other way of relating. And so that means that the discernment is my responsibility as the more mature believer. Maturity gives me responsibilities in relationship. Regardless of pastor, if I'm the more mature believer, I'm called to love them in a way that has a wisdom that they're not bringing. So what it means, we can talk about pastors. Pastors have roles they have to play in this, but in just relationship, what it means is it's much better to be consistent than it is to be constant. And what I mean by that is we offer ourselves as constant. I'll pick you up. We'll do this. We're drawing them in. We're heavily involved. But it's a pace that can't be sustained. And it's an involvement that we can't keep up. But if I'm consistent and I say, listen, so let's say you have somebody that wants to talk to you 3 times a week. This is often with women, when women tend to do this in more talking ways. I'll say, listen, she's going to call you up and she expects you to drop everything and talk. Or maybe the guy does. Maybe hey, listen, man, I need to talk to you. Next thing you know, it's a 2-hour conversation. Right? What I say is, listen, just because he texted you doesn't mean you have to get back to him right away. Right? There's no law in any culture I know of where you have to respond to a text right away. If you're consistent, though, so if I have somebody, for example, who is trying to move toward me and using text to do that, first of all, I'll say this probably a dozen times. Never text counsel. Never text counsel. Face-to-face counsel. Now you can say, someone says, can you pray for me this? Yeah, I'm happy to pray for you. So it doesn't mean you're, but if you're getting involved in this and you're counseling with your thumbs, you will not help somebody. Even if that's the way they do life. That's what for your generation, I have to say, you have to be countercultural. I'm sorry, I don't use text that way. It doesn't matter if they want to, because you have a higher calling. And the nature of counseling, as we'll see, cannot be done through thumbs. Because I don't have any idea of what's really coming. A lot of what my information from you is what I'm observing and the way we're interacting. And it's the biggest problem I have with folks who are in their 20s and early 30s, is they use texting the way the culture used texting, and it's very unhelpful to counsel somebody according to the Scriptures. Now you can give them a text, you can say, hey, listen, here's a verse I was thinking about. There are things you can do to encourage, but if you're in the habit of doing all your counseling through thumbs. I have a friend of mine who's a pastor who does it, and he's not on our team, but I'm always on him, man, you can't do that. Eventually it's going to blow up. And you're going to have a whole record of what you said. And it's going to be interpreted in ways you didn't know was interpreted. It's got to be face-to-face in some sense. But yeah, so I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to be discerning. I recognize this person. Once you've ever gone through that experience, you know what it feels like when it starts. So then you're saying, okay, great. You always make sure, let's get you involved with the group, right? And I can only help you from within the group, whatever it's the church or whatever. I can't go outside the church, and because people they don't want the church, they don't want the community. They want individual attention. And you're training them that it's the community where there's life, not individual attention. So if I feel like somebody's pulling me out, I'll stop at a certain place and say, this is where I'm at. And it's much, here's what happens. Is this helpful? We're totally off the page now. So I just want to make sure it's helpful. You have somebody, usually if in this kind of a situation, you have somebody whose life is disordered. It's chaotic. Their emotional state is chaotic. They can't stay stable. They feel they need other people to keep them stable. So their life emotionally looks like this. It's just all over the place, right? Like that's what their internal life feels like. How they're doing, I don't know. They're just all over like this. And what they want you to do, they want you to keep up. They want you to follow the same line. Wherever they're at, they want you to be there for them. And that is impossible. The better way to handle it is in their chaos, you just say this. I'm going to be right here. That's where you'll find me. I'm right here. And whenever you need me, I'll be in the same place. I'm not chasing. I'm not running after you. I'm not letting you determine how I help you. That's unkind. Why? Because I'm playing the role only Jesus can play. Only Jesus can follow. Only Jesus can go and handle this. If I start doing this, I play a mini Messiah role. And I can't do that. And so and you're actually training somebody how to relate in true fellowship, because they start to realize that this is how trust is built. You are really going to be there. So there'll be times, for example, where they're going to text and say, listen, I need to talk. And you're going to say, you know what, I got time. Yeah, let's talk. And there are going to be times they text, I need to talk, and you're going to say, you know what, I have other commitments. I can't talk. You may not tell them this, but I can't talk right now. But let's connect tomorrow night. Right? And they say, but I need to talk right now. I'm sorry, I can't. Is there a reason you need to talk right now? And if I don't get a good reason, then I'm okay with not talking to them. What am I teaching them? That their sense of urgency does not determine my life. Their sense of need does not become my need. That's what we have to do to be kind to people, because in the long run, people will trust us, because what we actually say we're going to do, we do over time, and that builds trust. So any questions? Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but I'll tell you how I do it. And I'm going to use this is based on how things function in the States. I have categories for situations. I have emergency, I have crisis, I have problem, I have opportunity. Right? Emergency means you either need the police or you need a doctor. You need to get somebody to help you because you're about to die, or you're in that level of trouble. That's an emergency. I can't counsel you in emergency. You need, so what we call 911. So in the States, 911 is a number you put on your phone, and by doing that, you'll get a dispatch, and they'll either send if you say, you know, I've got part of my insides that are now outside, they'll send an ambulance. If you say, you know, I'm dangling from my roof, they'll send the fire department. If you say, I've got somebody outside my house with a gun, they'll send the police. They know what to do. That's what I tell people. You need to call 911. So whatever the equivalent of that would be in this culture is, you have a true emergency, you need emergency help. Now I might be able to come behind that and make sure you're okay. But I can't. Domestic violence. In our culture, well, the general principle in domestic violence is you never go intervene, because you will become part of it. If there's active, you have to have the police involved in our culture. Because if an individual goes into a domestic violence situation, they potentially escalate it, because we don't know how to de-escalate it, and they potentially become a victim of it, because sometimes both people turn on them. So that's a situation where I say, if that's going on, you need the police involved. So that's emergency. Crisis means this is something that I think I need to take responsibility to get involved in. What's a crisis? The man who called me and said, my wife died this morning, and I've been dealing all day with, it was unexpected. I've been dealing all day, and I just need to tell somebody, okay, you've just had a death in your family. I'm dropping everything and I'm going. You have a situation where my teenager has left home and I don't know where they're at. That's a crisis. You have a situation where my husband's behaving erratically. He doesn't seem to make sense. I'm going to go over and try to help out. Something where, as a pastor, I have a place and I can go do something. That's a crisis. And I will drop everything. I will say, I've got to cancel a meeting. I will leave church. With this situation with my friends who died of cancer, he was in the final days, and I got a call, at church. Looks like he might be going today. That's a crisis for me. They're going to experience. He actually didn't die that day, but I went straight over. I left church. Problem is most of the stuff that we deal with. Yeah, it's an issue, but me talking tonight about it or talking tomorrow is an issue of wisdom. Just because sometimes it's best to not talk about it immediately after it's happened. Somebody does something that they shouldn't have done, maybe they need to think about it a little bit. Maybe they're really angry right now and it's not going to help to talk about it. It's not usually helpful for pastors to get involved to talk people down off of anger, unless they're going to escalate in a way that's unhelpful. If they're just angry, so if I have a marriage that's a problem marriage, and I get a call from the husband and he's just, I'm so angry, I say, well, don't do anything stupid, and let's talk in the morning. What am I doing? I'm not being uncaring. I'm saying, what is the best way to help in this problem? Now, you learn that over time. And you learn that because you have a relationship with people and you discern. And sometimes I will get the help of another pastor. Here's what's going on. What do you think I should do? And they'll help me. I think you can wait on that one. I think, So that's problems. And then opportunities are just situations where I feel like, wow, maybe finally the person is getting convicted about something. Maybe, let's say it's pornography, and a guy calls you, and it's a different kind of a call than he's called you before. It's a call of, I need to do something different with this. And you recognize in his voice, oh, there's an opportunity to go over there, and maybe there's an opening here for the Lord. Maybe it's in a situation in a marriage where you have a wife who's a believer and a husband who isn't a believer, and the husband has found out about something in his family that's really affected him, and they don't know who to talk to, and she's saying he might talk to you. I'm going to cancel a lot of things. When it comes to an unbeliever, a chance for evangelism, that's always an opportunity. I'm going to cancel a lot of things to get with an unbeliever. That's how what we call triage. Emergency, crisis, problem, opportunity. Problem is for me to decide best how to handle it, not the other person to decide best how to handle it. Sometimes I'm going to be wrong. Sometimes I'm going to realize I should have come last night. But I can make that up. I can fix that problem. I can repent. I can confess. Or maybe it's just I made a wrong decision. So, is that helpful? Yeah. So, someone has a heart attack. They have to go to the hospital because they have a heart attack. That's an emergency. I can't fix a heart attack, right? I'm not going to go to their house and say, let me fix your heart attack. No, go to the hospital. I go there. The emergency's taken care of, but this is a crisis for the family. Let's say there's a wife there and she's distraught. She doesn't know what to do, so I'm there, and I'm comforting her. That's a crisis for her, and I'm comforting her. In the process, I realize there are issues that are going to come up because of what's happened. He's got a financial. Okay, now there's a problem I have to. Okay, great. And so what I'm doing with her, I'm saying, listen, don't worry about that right now. We'll deal with that later. Let's stay focused. And so I'm working the problems, right? and then the unbelieving daughter comes in, now I have an opportunity as well. And so I stopped talking to the mom, and I realized, God, from a perspective of my involvement tonight, the most important thing that happened was the daughter coming in and me being able to create a relationship that I can begin to potentially help her see her need for Christ. The guy recovers, their situation resolves, but now I have somebody that I'm reaching out to in Christ. Let's say it's a man, and so we don't get into the women situation. You find somebody. As pastors, we are brought into people's vulnerable experiences, and we're often given a place in the family that other people aren't given. So whenever you have a problem like that, there are almost always opportunities around it. And a lot of times I'm become much more focused on the opportunities than the problem. I can help, just by being there, and they don't need a lot from me. But this person over here has questions, and they're struggling, and they've never talked to a pastor before, and I'm introducing to them gospel care. I've had all four. Two things. One of it goes back to the issue of consistent. As long as I'm consistent, that, for example, when they contact me, they get me, I respond. Even if my response is a text that's saying, listen, I can't talk right now, but I can call you back and I'm consistent, so they know I'm available. They know people get upset when they don't feel like they can get hold of you. But that doesn't mean you have to respond every time. So determining what's consistent, that's why we love pastoring in teams, because we help each other understand the best way to do that. The other thing is stability. Once a crisis has become a stable situation, in other words, it's not going to go back into problems, and the problem's still there, because you'll see in counseling that whatever the situation is, the crisis reveals other problems. But stability is what tells you it's just a problem to be dealt with over time. It's basically stable. I'll give you an example. Again, I'm using examples from my cultural context only to say that there are certain ways people respond to things that may or may not be the way people respond to things here. But you have a marriage that is in constant conflict, and you've intervened and you've tried, and then let's say the husband says, I'm just going to leave, right? What is that? Is that an emergency? Unless he's going to jump off a building, probably not, right? He's not suicidal. He's just going to leave. I don't know where he's going to go. Maybe he's going to go get drunk. Maybe he's going to go have a prostitute. I don't know. I'm not chasing him unless he's communicating, I'm going to go, I can't stop him. I can't restrain him. So he's gone. The situation there now is stable in the home. He's chaos. So now my focus is on him. Okay, what do I do? Okay, he's left home. Now it's, okay, where does he stay at some point? I'm going to wait for him to contact me, because I don't want to deal with an arrogant, angry man, because he's not going to be responsive to care. I'm not going to be able to talk him in or out of anything. So I'm going to wait till he gets, I'm going to let, we call it, in one of the words we use is, if you're cooking something in the oven, in your stove, in your oven, and you take it out too early, it's not going to work. Some things need to stay in the oven longer. Let the heat continue to work in his life. I'll just watch that. I won't try to stop it. I'll just be there. I'm here. I'm here for you if you need me. But what am I doing? I'm treating it like a problem. You're not a crisis to me right now. Now, if you do something stupid and create a crisis, we'll have to deal with it. if you end up in jail. But it's interesting in that situation, if he ends up in jail, that's not a crisis to me. In our culture, a good 24 hours in jail can do a lot to help somebody get perspective. Having the police show up and put handcuffs on you in front of your children can give you perspective. I don't mind that. I'm calm. I'm not worried. I'm not upset. So yeah, I think that you're looking to, is something stable, or if I don't act, is it going to get worse all of a sudden? That's where I would treat it more like a crisis. If I don't act, it will inevitably get worse. So therefore I have a choice, then I'm probably going to act. But if I think, no, it's not going to get any worse the way it is, then I'm going to wait and let's see what God wants me to do before I jump in.